welcome everybody to the very first virtual APEC Women's Empowerment Roundtable. It's the very first time APEC leaders are meeting virtually, so this roundtable is both historic and significant. And on behalf of FedEx and all the amazing women and men leaders here today, it gives me great pleasure to lead today's discussion. The APEC theme for 2020 is optimizing human potential towards a resilient future of shared prosperity, pivot, prioritize, and progress. And just as this year's forum looks different, so too does collaboration and engagement. We are convening during an unprecedented time, but I am encouraged by the work being done within the APEC economies. In particular, how leaders in APEC are placing women and girls at the center of economic recovery efforts and creating opportunities that can further unlock their potential by removing barriers to better drive a swift, inclusive, and sustainable recovery. I know everyone here recognizes the economic and social impact the pandemic has had on women and women-owned micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs in particular. The challenge for all of us here is not just to discuss what's next for women across APEC, but really focus on how we all as leaders can drive a collective, coordinated, and inclusive response to mitigate the impact, and in particular, what actions we can encourage so women play a crucial role in post-pandemic recovery. Truth is, innovation and entrepreneurship are happening right now as well. Within this global challenge, we are seeing incredible things. But first, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our first distinguished guest. Kelley Currie is the United States Ambassador at Large for Global Women Issues. Ambassador Currie has always been had a strong focus on the Asia-Pacific region where I am based. She also serves simultaneously as the US representative at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Throughout her career, she has specialized in human rights, political reform, development, and humanitarian issues. Ambassador, you've been a vocal champion of strategies that empower women, including advocating the importance of effective, creative, and innovative policy that spurs diversity of thought and inclusive, durable solutions. And how the status of women and girls is a bellwether for stability, and how much is at stake if women aren't able to participate meaningfully. I am particularly interested in hearing more about the Women's Development and Prosperity Initiative, whose pillars include women prospering in the workforce, women succeeding as entrepreneurs, and women enabled in the economy. Let me turn the floor over to you, Ambassador Currie.
Thank you so much, Kawal. That was a very generous and kind, a little bit overwhelming introduction. Thank you. And I can't take too much credit for some of the great innovative things that we're doing right now, because I have such a wonderful team and really great colleagues across the interagency. And I work with amazing colleagues, whether it's our friends at the Development Finance Corporation, who are leveraging tremendous support from the private sector, to our friends in the Millennium Challenge Corporation, who are baking the precepts that you talked about into their compacts with countries around the world, or whether it's our great supporting friends at USAID and the innovative programming opportunities that they're finding and funding around the world. I have a really incredible interagency set of partners, as well as the team that I have in my own office that helps us implement these great programs, and the incredible political support from our leadership, from Secretary Pompeo, as well as from the White House, and the vision behind all of this out of the Office of Economic Initiatives and Advisor Trump, who really wanted to develop a set of policy and programming initiatives that would be durable, as you said, that would be innovative and would allow us to have that durable impact. And it was, we didn't develop the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative with COVID in mind, obviously, when it was created in 2019 and launched, but it has proven to be a really remarkable set of programming and policy parameters for us to use, and great tools and platforms for us to use as we've tried to respond to the economic crisis that has coincided and been created by the pandemic, and the need and how women have been so disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. It's our emphasis on entrepreneurship, the emphasis on bringing women into the formal economy from the informal economy, the emphasis on that enabling environment, on making sure that we're removing legal and regulatory barriers to women's participation, has been incredibly timely, and has really been a great set of tools for us to respond to the pandemic. And so I think that we, when we first started to realize the consequences of what had happened back in March, we had a meeting with the White House where we talked about what do we need to do with WGDP in particular? Do we need to change, shift up our emphasis? Do we need to change what we're doing? And we really took a hard look at it and said, is this the appropriate response? And it turned out that it has been a really good response for us, because, and I think that this is really critical. The thing that really underlines WGDP, the animating principle behind it, is that women are drivers of economic growth, and that women are that you need to engage that half of your population if you want to have a successful country, if you want to have a successful economy. You can't leave women behind, and you can't put up barriers to their full and meaningful participation in the economy. And because that's what WGDP is all about, because that has become abundantly clear in the wake of the pandemic and the economic challenges that it has caused, it's really helped us to drive home the need for countries to make the necessary changes. And what's also, I think, been really effective in the way that we've framed this is most of the changes that we're asking countries to make don't cost them anything. We're talking about asking governments to remove legal barriers that keep women on the sidelines, such as their ability to travel freely, or their ability to access institutions, have equal access to credit, ability to work in the same jobs and sectors and under the same conditions as men, and their ability to inherit and own property and manage property on an equal basis as men. These things, they don't require a big outlay of government funding. They just require political will. We all know how expensive political will can be in terms of getting things done, but it doesn't cost a cent, really. And so we really have found that by saying we're talking about low cost, high impact things that you can do. And back in February, again, before the pandemic, we had the Council of Economic Advisors did a study on just those 5 areas of law I mentioned. If we could get rid of all the barriers globally in just those 5 areas of law, then it could create $7.7 trillion in additional global GDP, which is a huge number. And it's incredibly meaningful now when we've seen the global economy shrink by that much in the past 9 months. To say that, you can get that back, all you have to do is get rid of these laws that are keeping women from being able to fully participate. Now, that's really not all we have to do. Obviously, you have to go to the broader enabling environment. You have to have credit available to women. You have to have banks. Even if the laws change, you have to have banks that are willing to lend to women and who understand that they have to collateralize women differently. And you have to have you have to have the training and the skills that women need to be able to be successful entrepreneurs, to start, grow, and scale their businesses. And so we're working across all of that too at the same time. And it's been an amazing thing to watch the response from our developing country partners, how enthusiastic they've been about the approach that WGDP takes, that it really is a partnership, that it brings the private sector along and relies on pro-growth, private sector driven growth. That is the key for a lot of countries that have not up to now been able to unlock that and really benefit from it in their own economies. So we're really enthusiastic about that. The other thing that I think is really, I think especially meaningful, and in the Asia Pacific region is a very meaningful thing, is that we very intentionally link up our women's global development prosperity, the women's economic engagement agenda, with our women peace and security agenda in a very cohesive way, because we understand that we have to make these links together, and that we are really focused on fragile, conflict affected states, on how these things are mutually reinforcing. I just had a great call today with the Colombian with our friend Heidi Gallo in the president's office in Colombia, who we were talking about the need that Colombia has to get women out of the illegal economy in the conflict affected areas, and the areas of Colombia that have been most affected by conflict because of the role that women, the limitations first on their ability to earn, to have an income or a livelihood. We need to change the paradigm there, and then the incredibly beneficial impact that would have on conflict and on tamping down the drivers of violence and conflict in Colombia. So these things are very intimately related. We see that, and that's why we are working so closely with our friends in APEC economies, whether it's Japan and Korea and other donors in APEC, or the developing countries that we work with, to help support them on their journey to self-reliance. It's been a really great time to be working with our friends in APEC on these things. And with that, I think I'm going to end it and let somebody else talk for a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your kind thoughts and your leadership. Well, let's get some thoughts from the other side of the Pacific with Secretary Renee Graham, Ter Tumu Fakardai Morter Wahine. Secretary Graham, you lead the Ministry of Women in New Zealand, in addition to your APEC role on policy partnerships on women and the economy. It was during your tenure that the ministry successfully gained ministerial agreement for an increased 50% target for women on public sector boards and an action plan to eliminate the gender pay gap in the core public service. But it's your APEC role, and specifically the intersection between women and the economy, that I'd like you to speak to. Over to you, Secretary Graham.
Tēnā koutou katoa, greetings everyone, tēnā koe Kawal. Thank you for your pronunciation of my title. It's very appreciated. Wahine in our Indigenous language means woman, and we sometimes combine that with wahine toa, which means strong woman. So you'll be seeing that, probably hearing that quite a bit for a while. You talked about a couple of the successful measures we've had in New Zealand in the last year or so. And I think one of the key strategies for the government in terms of the work that we've done here more recently has been to, get our own house in order. So how can the, government ask private sector to do stuff if we haven't really done it in our own house? So that meant really successful approaches in women on boards and the lowest gender pay gap in the state sector ever. And also we have over 50% of our chief executives in the public service are women. So that means that we're now in a position to support private businesses to be able to take the same approaches. So that's fantastic. Coming to COVID and New Zealand's COVID response, I think one of the key strategies that the government implemented earlier on was to support businesses to retain employees and support them financially during lockdown. So we went into lockdown like a number of other people, where people couldn't go to work. And that particularly affected women in the tourism sector, for instance, and other countries and economies will know this is the same impact around the world. And one of the key initiatives that the government implemented pretty much immediately was wage subsidies. So that was a payment directly to employers to keep their employees on. And that of the wage subsidy, nearly half, or 43% of women benefited from payment on that wage subsidy, which meant that they could retain their attachment to their employer or to the labour market initially, and didn't have to come out of the labour market or onto benefits. So that was quite beneficial to women, particularly some women in particular sectors, like I said, in the tourism. The tourism sector, for instance, has a lot of our Indigenous population in it as well. So they benefited from the wage subsidy. Another investment we did at the time was around family violence. So, work is a place that sometimes women go to get a bit of safety from home or a bit of relief. So we're at home all the time. It's understandably that family violence increases a little bit. So we did some more investment into that. Particularly worrying about kids not being in schools, because schools were the area where teachers, keep an eye out for young kids. And so if they're not going in school, you're not getting notified to our child protection. So a little bit of a worry about children not going to school and being at home. So it's quite a social sector focus for women, particularly in New Zealand. Another investment we did was around apprenticeships and trade training, so that women or people could transfer into getting apprenticeships where there was a lot of investment and money in the construction trades training, for example. And we know that the number of women in apprenticeships doubled between July and October this year. So that's having an effect as well. So that was the initial investment that we did, the government did around COVID. And all the efforts for the first quarter or so, there wasn't a lot of change in the unemployment rates in New Zealand. They were kind of static at a macro level, but in a micro level, there kind of started to be little indications in some sectors and in some regions that women were suffering. That kind of came out more so now in the last quarter, where we now know that 3/4 of those people who lost their jobs in the last quarter or to COVID, because of COVID, were women. So our first part was a generic realistic approach. And what I hope now is that we could start working on some really targeted initiatives. So exactly where in the sector, in the labour market, are women really suffering, what sector, what tourism, where it is, and to try and actually develop some initiatives that target specifically for women. So be really interested and appreciative if I can hear any other initiatives or ideas about where and how that would happen. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Graham. Well, we've heard a little about the US perspective and the innovation coming out of New Zealand. I'd now like Sandra Oudkirk, Senior Official for APEC and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands of the US State Department, to say a few words. Sandra, it's great to see you again virtually, and now let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Kawal. I'm extremely grateful to you, Monica, Barbara, and the entire NC APEC team, along with ABAC and everyone else who has assisted in putting together this event today. I really appreciate the invitation to speak. I'd like to thank everyone here on the screen for joining and for your continued commitment to women's economic empowerment in the APEC region. It has been a truly challenging year for everyone, and APEC has been impacted much like the rest of the world. The United States, along with the rest of the APEC economies, has prioritized supporting Malaysia in reorienting APEC's agenda toward economic recovery during and post COVID-19. APEC's work in supporting those who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic will be critical to restoring economic growth and helping economies withstand future shocks. At the same time, we have focused on minimizing disruptions and maintaining momentum on APEC's core work, such as trade and the digital economy, as well as the long-term work on improving the business climate and the regulatory environment for US businesses. We have continued to press forward our work on women's economic empowerment, including support for the implementation of the La Serena Roadmap on Women and Inclusive Growth, and to better understand the economic impacts of structural barriers to women's economic participation. As Ambassador Currie discussed, the United States has a strong commitment to women's economic empowerment across the globe, and this is especially true in APEC. APEC is a critical forum for us to move these efforts forward in cooperation with all economies and across the entire breadth of APEC's technical work programs. As Ms. Graham just mentioned, in 2019, under Chile's leadership, APEC launched the La Serena Roadmap on Women and Inclusive Growth. It's an effort that builds on the US's Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, the whole of government approach Ambassador Currie outlined. The La Serena Roadmap's implementation plan will require, among other things, that all sub-4 work plans incorporate women's economic empowerment into their programs. We hope that the roadmap, together with the Women in the Economy dashboard, which offers a data snapshot of women's status in the economy throughout the APEC region, will build champions for women's empowerment across APEC and catalyze action and progress. Our efforts have already been focused on introducing women's economic empowerment initiatives into other sub-fora. For instance, this year, a US-led partnership between the Small and Medium Enterprises Working Group and the Policy Partnership on Women in the Economy led to the creation of a Women in E-commerce Toolkit, which aims to support female entrepreneurs. With the implementation of the toolkit, governments can help female entrepreneurs like Pasita Juan, an owner of a coffee and sustainable lifestyle brand in the Philippines. With the government-led support recommended in the toolkit, Pasita explained to us that while she is not yet engaged in cross-border e-commerce, there is still a chance for me to learn how to go cross-border with e-payments through understanding trade regulations and logistics. Stories like hers are a testament to how our work in APEC manifests itself into tangible actions that empower women to more fully participate on the ground. These efforts are furthered by our support of structural reform and women's empowerment in the Economic Committee. In fact, the committee's 2020 APEC Economic Policy Report focuses on identifying and understanding the legal and regulatory barriers to women's economic participation in the hopes of making changes across economies to lower those barriers. Prior to COVID-19, the Economic Committee had begun discussing challenges with women's access to credit and women's access to markets. Structural barriers to women's economic participation have been magnified by the pandemic. As, for example, women often bear the lion's share of monitoring children forced to learn in a digital environment, often while also working full-time jobs themselves. Additionally, women have experienced disproportionate job losses due to their representation in the informal economy and MSMEs. These impacts draw us back to the 2019 US-sponsored report on APEC Women at Work, which calls for technical assistance to strengthen childcare policies across the region, as well as greater integration with ABAC and other private sector entities to implement new policies and continuing empowering women in all sectors. The 2020 APEC Women in the Economy Forum statement further commits to placing women and girls at the center of economic recovery efforts and to removing barriers to drive towards a swift, inclusive, and sustainable recovery. As private sector representatives who work extensively in the APEC region, you have the ability to set an example on how we remove structural barriers to women's economic participation, and more specifically, to set an example by placing women in key leadership positions. In addition to having women represented in your organization's leadership structure, there's a need for you to leverage your investments and your hiring power in the region to push economies and their governments to remove structural barriers and to advocate for women in leadership roles. Further to the US government efforts I just mentioned, we continue to use our engagement in APEC to increase the representation of women and girls in science and technology, and to utilize the US established Women in the Economy Subfund to further efforts across all fora and economies. We hope you will join us in these efforts as we continue to use APEC as a space to empower women and girls to thrive in the current and future economy. I would like to thank you again for your time today and for continuing to use your positions within the APEC region to further efforts on women's economic empowerment. We look forward to continued collaboration with all of you in creating an APEC region that enables women to fully participate. I look forward to hearing more about your efforts in today's discussion and as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And thank you again, Ambassador Currie and Secretary Graham. Well, let's now open this up wider. One reason I am optimistic about the future of female entrepreneurship is that everywhere I turn, innovation is emerging in response to COVID-19. The pandemic has accelerated digital adoption. All economies in APEC have been through a lot, but these tough times could actually be the greatest opportunity for innovation-led growth that we've had in decades. Elizabeth Vasquez, as the CEO and co-founder of We Connect International, an organization committed to driving money into the hands of women business owners, I know much of your work is about helping women-owned businesses compete and connect into the global marketplace. Do you share my optimism in the power of technology and innovation from what you're seeing?
Absolutely. I agree with you. And it's so good to see so many friends working on these issues. It's such hard work. And the fact that we're doing this together means that we can achieve the goals that we're setting for ourselves. And they are measurable and they are urgent. So thank you to the NCAPEC organizers and everyone participating in this conversation about how we're going to take action. We Connect International has been surveying women business owners all over the world, and it should be no surprise to know that unfortunately over 84% of the women business owners we serve have seen a significant decrease in their sales or revenue. However, these women are resilient. 62% of them are identifying and cutting unnecessary expenses. 83% have shifted to a digital business model, and 42% are creating a new business line in response to local or global needs. And that's pretty amazing in such a short period of time for them to pivot in that way. So because of COVID, women business owners are stepping up, they are innovating, they're leveraging technology, as you said, to connect with new markets, but also with each other. They're very hungry to do business with each other and to support each other and to buy from each other. So in fact, We Connect International, we just launched our new We community, which is a multilingual online platform to connect very large buyers. I see Sarah's here with Walmart and women suppliers who are based in over 125 countries. This digital We community platform was actually launched with WGDP support in partnership with USAID, but also the private sector. So SAP Ariba, Accenture, ExxonMobil, IBM, Procter & Gamble, they all came together and said, we want to buy more from women-owned businesses. We are going to leverage our purchasing power, and we are going to make sure that women have an equal opportunity to compete for our business. And as all of you know, small businesses, they are the engine of economic growth and job creation. So it's absolutely critical for all businesses to have equal equal access to opportunity. And we're particularly committed to working with all of you to get as much money into the hands of women as fast as possible because of the inclusive way and sustainable way that women run their businesses and spend their money on their employees, their families, and their communities. And this is exactly what we're all going to need to not just survive, but to thrive during and after this global pandemic. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And again, building on what you've said and what Sandra said earlier about empowering women, and maybe I want to pass it to Penny Burt from an Asia Link viewpoint. What are your thoughts on how do we train women to actually play in this new digital economy?
Well, thank you very much. That's a great question. And as I look around the participants here, we have very deep digital expertise. So I'm sure that there will be others who would actually like to offer a view on this, including Andrea from Microsoft. I'd say the really most important thing up front at the moment as we're transitioning through COVID and we're looking for new opportunities to help empower women who've been disproportionately impacted. The first step we need to take is ensuring that in government's economic recovery packages and in the new efforts that are happening to create opportunities in the digital economy, women have access to those programs. They're able to participate in a meaningful way and at scale. So the first thing is ensuring that as governments are thinking about the new environment, they're actually taking a gendered lens to the opportunity to build digital capability going forward. I think the second thing that's really valuable, just speaking through the policy lens, is recognizing that digital equity is a major issue, not just within all of our individual communities, but across the Asia Pacific and across the APEC economies. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. We really need to be cognizant of where the greatest challenges are. The third thing I think that would be useful, and then I'm going to hand to those who are digital experts, is ensuring that where there is best practice happening, and Janet De Silva has just pointed out some remarkable initiatives that they've been taking in Toronto, that we're actually sharing across countries, across agencies, across organizations, all the fantastic things that are happening currently. It's incredibly inspiring to hear from Elizabeth about the new initiatives that We Connect put together. So forums like this, where we can actually hear about best practice and be inspired by new initiatives, mean we can take this away to our individual economies, to our workplaces, and really take the wisdom of the crowd in better navigating that opportunity. Kawal, I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Maybe I want to go to Andrea here. So Andrea, from a Microsoft perspective, give us your thoughts, please, on how can economic recovery be inclusive to empower women to both gain and contribute to rebuilding as we come out of the pandemic?
Well, firstly, thank you, Monica, Kawal and team for the invitation to join this distinguished forum. I'm excited to be part of this important discussion today. So let me start by just acknowledging the challenging times that we're living in. The pandemic has changed the way we work, the way we live, the way we learn, and even how we're connecting with our communities. And it really is a terrible fact that men are overrepresented among the fatalities of the virus, but as Kelley said, women are disproportionately impacted by the social and economic consequences. And we're seeing the boundaries between work, family, and home being blurred. And the mental stress of worrying about their family's health and finances, whilst meeting expectations at work, is really taking a toll on all workers, and particularly women. In addition, when you consider being laid off at higher rates for women versus male counterparts during this pandemic, women are considering downshifting their careers or even leaving the workforce altogether at staggering rates, which means stalling their careers and jeopardizing their financial security. And when women are the financial controllers of their home and their economic power is diminished, that impact on the worldwide economy can really be immediate. So when we think about how economies can respond and recover, it's really important that women empowerment is mainstreamed and that their role in the economy needs to be across industry. And frankly, it just can't be an afterthought or a tick box. You know, the whole idea of women economics, the idea that women economic advancement will improve the economy as a whole, is a powerful platform, and we really believe can have an impact on the world around us. So governments increasingly recognize that economies can reach their full potential, but only with the full participation of both men and women. And we feel collectively as leaders that we can help make that happen by ensuring access to education, skilling to build digital capabilities, as Penny referenced, and also technology. So one of the ways that we're doing this is our commitment, Microsoft's commitment globally, to help 25 million job seekers who have lost their jobs due to this pandemic, to help them reskill for the digital economy. And we've worked with governments and more than 30 nonprofits in Asia Pacific to increase employability of 1.2 million people entering the labour market. But we're also aware that there are more than 1 billion people with disabilities around the world. And in Asia, that number's actually close to 650 million. Now, women within this group are significantly marginalised. So we need to be intentional in our outreach, really with the power of our organisations and influence, to ensure that they have access to the same access to skills, technology and support to earn and contribute to the economy. And that's why here in APEC, we've also launched the Microsoft Enabler Program with business partners and nonprofits working together to improve the employability of people with disabilities in this region. And then with the world becoming a computer and every part of our daily life and work and really every aspect of our society and economy are being transformed by digital technology, this creates incredible opportunities. But what's needed for technology to support women, it really goes beyond the device itself. And it does include policy and support and resources for sustainable, flexible, and empathetic work environments, especially for parents and caregivers. So our mission is deeply inclusive to empower every person and every organisation on the planet to achieve more. But we expect that each of us, no matter what our level, our role, or our function is, to play an active role in creating environments where people of diverse range of backgrounds are excited to bring all of who they are and to be able to do their best work, and empowering women. So I'd like to end by just anchoring back to a point Kelley made earlier. By removing the legal barriers for women, that we can unlock 7.7 trillion in global GDP. So now more than ever, we need to come together to make this happen.
Thank you, Andrea. You know, you brought up really some interesting points. Let's unpack one of them further. So let me turn to Kathleen Quirk. Kathleen, Freeport McMoran has invests in several APEC economies. What do you think are the most important opportunities APEC economies can provide for women? You're on mute, Kathleen.
Thank you. We do operate in many APEC economies. We're in South America and the US and also in Asia. And we operate in remote locations. And in many cases, you know, women don't have the same access to technology and things that you might have in developed areas. And so really what we've focused our investments on in terms of advancement of women have been in the areas of entrepreneurship and small business development, in women in public leadership, and also in education, including remote learning. And we've had some programs in place that for many years that really weren't designed for COVID, but now they thrive in COVID. And one of them is called a Dream Builder. And it is an online skills development, free skills development course for women entrepreneurs and small business owners to learn about marketing and accounting and all aspects of running a business. And so those tools could be, just developed during COVID to keep people busy and contributing to the economies. We've also partnered with Vital Voices in a women's public leadership program to build capacity, and that's included some online learning with help from Harvard in capacity building for women in these societies. And I think these investments, like everyone is saying here, not only help these women, but really form the base for helping the economies in these remote areas where we operate.
Thank you, Kathleen. We heard an earlier point about the disproportionate impact that this pandemic is having on women, and also how it can be very difficult to work from home and balance childcare, family, parental care, and other demands at home. Ms. C-San-Ko, how does ExxonMobil support the connectivity of working mothers who are juggling business and personal challenges, particularly given the increased demands being placed on women during this period?
Hey, thank you for this question. And before I answer, I just want to say that really it's been such inspiration to hear from all of you. And I think really collectively we can do a lot together. So in answering your question, I would say that this pandemic has really impacted me a lot personally. So let me share a little bit. I was relocated from the US to China end of last year. And then, I left my home country, Singapore, for the last 12 years, being relocated in different parts of the world. And, it's the first time that we decided as a family that we will fly back to Singapore to celebrate Chinese New Year after 12 years being away. So my husband and daughter flew in from US and I flew in from China. Now, during that time, unfortunately, our son, who was attending college in Cleveland, US, and it's a call that I hope no parents have to receive. He was badly injured. And when we received the call, he was in the ICU, not very conscious, and we have to speak to the doctor, and doctors say that, hey, you got to prepare for the worst, that his leg may have to be amputated. And, it's like, wow. And we were like 24 hours away. We don't really have family in the US, in Cleveland, to support him. And because I was just in China not so long ago, I was not able to fly back to the US. And but subsequently, I was able to fly to Cleveland to be with him. And I would just say that ExxonMobil, I'm very thankful for the program. I think technology is key and program is key as well. So our workplace flexibility program really has allowed me to care for him when he needs me the most, while at the same time, I was able to work in the US, working in the China business for the last 6 months. I just successfully came back to China just end of August. So I'm really very thankful for our program, Workplace Flexibility. I think, one of you mentioned that the program is key, right? So I encourage all companies to have such program to support, parents, mothers, in order for us to strive. So I'm very thankful, not just for the program, but for my management and colleagues whether in US, in Singapore, in China, in supporting me. Now, the other program that we have, I have Power Play kind of in here, is that, we want to connect all the women and men as well to come in and talk about our issues, and then share about our best practices. And that's why we have this Power Play, LNG Power Play, that we have webinars, we have networking sessions, and then we have a work program to encourage each other. So I will just end by saying that, hey, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. So let's continue to encourage each other and to stay strong, and we can make a positive impact together.
Absolutely. Let me turn to Mike Pergine now. It's really important to understand the powerful impact of men as allies and advocates for women. Mike, can you please provide us some perspective from Merck and the healthcare sector on how we can turn the tide through cooperation and investment in women's health and healthcare systems that serve women, children, and people across Asia Pacific?
Sure. Thank you for the question, and thank you to everybody for organizing this. It's great to be part of it, and I'm humbled hearing all the stories and the programs that are happening. It's been pointed out many times tonight, the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on women in APEC and around the world, not just the health, but the livelihood of these women. It's also important to point out that almost 70% of healthcare workers are women. So they are disproportionately at risk, risking themselves to take care of all of us. So from a company perspective and an industry sector perspective, besides the aggressive pursuit of developing and producing and distributing effective and safe treatments and cures for COVID, there are other things that we can be doing beyond that and beyond the pandemic, and we should look beyond that pandemic as well to take care of the women as they take care of themselves, their families, their communities, and again, all of us. The first is we need to maintain the active dialogue and strengthen the partnerships in a public and private sector. We always have a better impact when we continue that dialogue, when we engage, and we look at the systems holistically. It's not just the investment to treat a disease, it's the impact that has on the economic well-being of the nation, along with the population health benefits. Secondly, I think we need to set effective targets and measure the impact. Key takeaways, I think, across anything we do, but particularly in health, is really setting those effective measures and routinely evaluating them. I'd love to hear from people in the coming weeks around their thoughts on setting targets around access to healthcare across APEC economies, public and private reimbursement levels, uptake around preventive medicines like vaccination, to services like screenings, to access to family planning and reproductive health like contraceptives, and for medicines and screening and services to manage the increasingly and seemingly continual rise of non-communicable diseases and chronic care conditions. There's a lot of examples that are out there from around the world that we can bring in, and I think it would help. As was mentioned earlier, women drive economic growth, and health is wealth around that. There are things that we can be doing to amplify health benefits individually and across populations and for economies. And third, I think it's really around strengthening local partnerships. I think APEC as an organization is uniquely qualified and uniquely positioned to bring together public and private partnerships across governments, across economies, across organizations, across small, micro, medium, and sized enterprises, and importantly, across sectors. We can leverage technology. There's been a lot of discussion around digital access to information for real-time benefit, for telemedicine, infrastructure, transportation. All of these things can come together with products and services to benefit the health of individual women, their communities, and the broader economy. So I think those are the places where I'd focus. Thank you for a chance to contribute.
Thank you, Mike, especially for joining us today. You're a great ally. We've got lots of exciting questions, but I'm afraid we are running out of time. Before we conclude this, because this conversation is going to keep going, I do want to turn it to Sarah very quickly. Sarah, Walmart's partnered with National Center of APEC to host roundtables on women empowerment since 2011. Could you briefly touch on, in your view, what has changed and what still remains as challenges to full participation for women in APEC countries?
Well, thank you, Kawal, and thank you to everybody for such an amazing evening. I feel like whenever we host these, we always run out of time because there's such enthusiasm for this issue. I would say the thing that I think has changed the most in almost the decade that we've been working on these issues intensely is we used to actually have to make the case, believe it or not. We had to get the data and show why investing in women was important. And actually think about that. We actually had to make the case and use data to say it's important to invest in women. The good news is I don't think we have to start conversations by saying it's important. I think people understand it. I think the challenge is a lot of the things that we've laid out today is that women still are not participating fully in the economy. And you see that so dramatically when you have such massive disruptions. And we see it particularly both in terms of frontline workers, balancing the pandemic, but also at the base of the pyramid in supply chains, where we've seen, because of the massive shifts in supply and demand, really dramatic changes at the factory level and beyond in the farm level for workers in our supply chain. And so that's why I want to thank you all, FedEx, for continuing this important tradition. I do think there's so much that can come out of this conversation, which is why I'm really excited about the remarks from Ambassador Currie and Secretary Graham that this is an issue that continues regardless of party, regardless of affiliation. We know it's important to work together, and we know how important APEC is because of the public-private partnership. So thank you to you. Onward on the work. This is always so inspirational. I was not looking forward to a 12-hour day, but now I'm glad I stuck it out.
Thank you, Sarah. So, thank you to all of you for participating today, sharing your insights, sharing the policy programs that many of you are engaged in, and also your personal experiences. In these remarkable times, more than ever, we know that diversity in all its forms is critical to recovery, particularly diversity of thought, in mindset, and in ways we look at the world. I'm so privileged to be here to share this experience and learn from you all. And I'm equally pleased that FedEx itself is forging ahead on diversity in Asia Pacific, where women make up more than 70% of the roles here in finance, legal, human resource, and customer experience. And we work very hard at advancing and supporting women. And in supporting and empowering women entrepreneurs worldwide, we at FedEx have always had a strong connection with APEC because what we do is all about connectivity and collaboration. It's all about multiplying possibilities, including for women. And all of us here today, leading businesses and stakeholders in government, in society, let's keep working together to keep women's empowerment at the heart of everything we do. And if I were to sum this up, let's come together to create an enabling, inclusive, and durable environment to drive meaningful impact and change. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today. And with that, over to you, Monica.